Hi, I'm Urmi Desai, editor at Move Smartly, and this is the Move Smartly Show. It is time for our regular consumer Q&A session, The Situation. And the month of May and spring is bringing in some complex questions from buyers and sellers across the Toronto area. So I'm very interested in hearing the answers that my co-host, John Pasalis, will have for these consumers. John is the president and broker at Realosophy Realty here in Toronto. John, you ready?
Ready to go.
All right. I just want to remind everyone first that you can send in your own questions for consideration for a future show to askjohn@movesmartly.com. If you have a situation you would like to talk to John about in private, you can book a meeting at movesmartly.com/meetjohn. And all of this information is in our show notes. As always, if you find our show useful, please like, subscribe, share, or leave us a positive review on whatever platform you're accessing us from. We really appreciate your support. And now, on to today's show. John, let's start with number one. Here is our first question for our May Consumer Q&A session, The Situation. Hi, John. I'm in a bit of a serious bind here. I purchased a pre-construction unit for $507,000 in 2019. I signed a pre-approval for financing with Scotiabank, and one of the conditions, as it was explained to me by my broker, was to do an appraisal to determine market rent, as this is an investment property. The appraiser came back with a shocking $455,000 evaluation on the property, over $50,000 less than what I paid for it. Apparently, the appraiser referenced an assignment sale in the same building to determine the resale market value of the unit once it would be completed. How can an assignment sale price be considered when it is not even the sale of a property, but the sale of an agreement to buy a pending property? Assignments are fraught with restrictions and cannot be marketed or financed in the same way a resale property can be. Moreover, how can the appraiser find any valid comparable sales in a building that is still under construction without any of the units closed or resold in it? Somehow, inflation over the last 5 years has caused my construction purchase to fall in price, yet Scotiabank wants 7.4% interest for a 1-year fixed mortgage for it. John, please help me make sense of this crazy situation. I appreciate your help, Gregor. I raise my mug, my keep calm and carry on mug to Gregor.
Well done. It is a bit of a crazy situation. So just to unpack a few things that were mentioned for people who aren't familiar with pre-construction condos. So an assignment is basically happens when someone who bought a pre-construction condo wants to basically sell their rights to that condo before they actually own the condo. So imagine I bought my condo, pre-con condo 3 years ago, but it's not scheduled to be completed for another couple of years, say. But I want out of the deal. I don't want to take possession. I've decided to move. So in that case, what we're doing is assigning the contract because you don't own it yet. You can't sell it. In the good old days, people would assign and make a profit. So they would have bought for 500. Prices go up. You sell it for 600. This is why everyone wanted to speculate in housing. I mean, you just kind of lock up some money in deposits and then flip the contract in 3 years. I mean, that was the theory, at least, that a lot of agents were selling. So that is what an assignment sale is. So the question here from Gregor is, how can the bank appraise his property for less than what he bought it for based on an assignment sale? So he doesn't own the unit yet, but I guess it sounds like he's scheduled to take completion. So I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm not an appraiser, so I can't speak for sort of the Appraisal Institute's guidelines. But there's a couple of things that stand out. Number one is for the appraiser to know about it, it must have been publicly marketed on a platform like MLS for them to be able to access that. This, quite frankly, is one of the reasons why most builders do not allow seller or like pre-construction buyers and agents to advertise listings on the MLS. So one of the things, and this is, I mean,
advertise assignments on the MLS, not listings.
Assignment properties on the MLS. And this is what was touched on. Like normally, if you want to assign a pre-construction condo, the builder does not allow them to be posted on the MLS for two reasons. One is this one, that if you sell it for less than what you bought it for, it impacts everyone else's value potentially. But also the builder has sometimes a lot of inventory as well that they're trying to sell. So they don't want to be competing with existing investors, and they don't want those existing investors to potentially drive down the price of their units, right? So this is one of the reasons why normally you can't market it. But for an appraiser to use it, it must have been marketed publicly. And I don't see why an appraiser can't use an assignment sale if it was publicly marketed. It'd be problematic if they somehow found one that wasn't publicly marketed. You don't know if it's like some kind of transaction between family members. Like, it's one of the reasons why normally like an appraiser would not take a private sale when they're coming up with an appraisal, because you don't know what was going on with that transaction. It could have been, there could be other details that, that they don't have access to because the unit or the property was not publicly marketed, right?
Like selling at a discount to a family member.
Exactly, something like that. That's a very good example, right? So I don't see why they can't use it. I mean, the situation does seem a little bit weird. I mean, someone who bought a pre-con condo in 2019, I mean, without knowing where this property is or, the details, I mean, I would think that the value would have gone up a little bit, in that time. At least probably shouldn't be below what he paid for it. Now, the other thing is, I will say that an appraiser can't really or shouldn't really use just one comparable. Like, just because one unit, going back to this point, like one seller, maybe they were distressed, decides to assign their unit at a cheap price, one transaction does not make the market, right? So if that's the situation, they're just leaning on one sale, I mean, I would push back personally if I was in that situation. Like, and we've had not often, but sometimes appraisers come back with like weird valuations that we don't agree with. Sometimes, I mean, and I don't want to, like, it's harsh to say it, but like sometimes like appraisal pick comparables that are not comparable, like in completely different markets, like something like 5 kilometers away. And you're like, what the heck are you thinking? So, sometimes when we see appraisers or appraisals that don't make any sense, we have to push back and say, well, doesn't make sense. This is why, and these are some of the comparables that we use. So similarly, in this situation, if they only used one comparable, the challenge is with a new building, there are no resale units. So now you have to kind of would look at the building that this person's buying in and comparing to existing resale units that are similar, right? And again, if there are no similar units, if there are no similar brand newly built condos in that immediate area, well, what are your comparables? I mean, it obviously starts getting quite tricky. So I would be, if they only used one comparable, I probably would be pushing back. I'd be looking at existing stock of units that are in the area, ideally also somewhat similar buildings to kind of justify the price. But yeah, you don't have to necessarily just take whatever the appraiser says. Like, you have to, if you can come up with a reasoned argument why they should revisit their appraisal, sometimes you can do that.
A follow-up question for you, John. Now, you mentioned that normally appraisals are prohibited by the builders from
No,
being
not
advertised on the MLS. Assignment sales, sorry,
Yes.
I said appraisals. So assignment sales, usually because you're still under a contract to buy a unit, the builder that you're buying from can stipulate this restriction. And the restriction is you can't widely advertise this on the MLS. So my question to you is, could Gregor look at a place where people share this info? Because presumably information about appraisals still get out.
No,
So,
but yeah, yes and no, because you don't, you mean information about assignments get out.
sorry, assignments. I keep saying appraisals. Yeah. So if it is there a website like I'm gonna say Kijiji or a third-party website, where do people make it known that an assignment sale's on offer?
So all you know is that it is on offer, and that's the challenging part, right? There's no record of the trade of what happened, at what price people paid on an assignment that is listed on a third-party website, right? So you might be able to say, okay, these units are listed for sale at this price, but list prices are irrelevant, right? Like an appraiser can't go in and look at list prices because no one's appraisal would come in properly. Most people list prices in resale market for 20% less than what they're actually going to sell for, right? So the appraiser cannot use what assignment sales are being marketed for. They have to know what they actually transacted at, and they don't really know that because that happens between lawyers, quite frankly, behind the scenes. Like there's no record of it. And that's actually one thing that is actually, I will add, I mean, just to digress, it's actually one thing that I think Canada is quite behind on. They don't have a registry of pre-construction transactions, right? And this is like massive. I mean, I did some work in Dubai like in 2017, and they had a housing bubble, and they actually created a registry. The way we have a land registry now for existing homes, they kind of created a land registry for pre-construction deals. And a lot of that was to have transparency into what was going on in the pre-construction market, because in their market, during the crazy days of the Dubai's housing market, when it was a bubble, people were flipping pre-construction contracts in the matter of months for like hundreds of thousands of dollars. Like it was just ridiculous how rapidly prices were going up and how quickly people were flipping. So to mitigate the negative side effects of people flipping pre-construction contracts, well, you need some transparency into those agreements. So they basically have a land registry and able to track the number of properties that are being flipped at any given point in time, and then have policy levers to obviously try to cool that if it happens, right? So this would be potentially one way of having more data. But again, if they're not widely advertised, you would still run into the same issue with an assignment sale to use it as a comparable.
Well, maybe after the federal government finishes its renter price
Right.
database, it can get started on this assignment sale one.
I mean, yeah,
Mhm.
you'd think they would do the assignment was far more important, but anyhow, yes.
A final question for you to clarify something you touched upon was the idea of an assignment sale being sold by a distressed seller.
Mhm.
I think a lot of us have this association in our heads, informally. Why is it that somebody that's holding a contract to purchase the condo when it's finished,
Mhm.
why are they trying to sell it before the condo is closing?
Yeah, so
And why might they offer a sale price at a discount to get that deal done?
So this is something that makes buying a pre-construction condo quite different from buying a resale condominium, right? So let's just say, rather than buying a new condo, this person bought an existing condo for 500 plus thousand 5 years ago, and today it's worth 455. Okay, let's just say what he did was an existing unit rather than pre-construction unit. So he's renting it, and his mortgage and his property is now worth $50,000 less than what he paid for it. But when his mortgage comes up for renewal, the bank doesn't care that it's worth less, right? As long as he keeps paying his mortgage, he's fine. He renews his mortgage, keeps collecting his rent, he owns the property. There's no distress. Like as long as he can pay his bills, he's fine. What makes pre-construction quite different is that, so he's put down, say, $120,000 deposit or whatever he put down. But when the time comes to take possession, because the bank says the property's worth $50,000 less than what you paid for it, he now has to come up with an extra $50,000 in order to close, in order to get a mortgage. So if he doesn't have $50,000 just kicking around in cash that he could just write a check from in order to get his mortgage, what happens is he defaults, right? He defaults, he cannot close. All of the money that he's put down as a deposit is kind of held in trust. I mean, what will happen to it kind of depends on what happens with the sale, but effectively, they become distressed because they can't close. So they're trying to recover whatever money they can, right? In order to kind of not be in breach of the agreement with the builder, right? So this is largely why some people find themselves like in this distressed position where they just don't have that money, or they don't qualify for a mortgage anymore because interest rates are 7% or whatever they're paying, 5.5%, right? So this is why someone might be distressed. And again, that's what makes pre-construction quite different. It's a little bit more speculative and riskier. I mean, people don't think of it as risky because, I mean, prices have gone up, you know, in Toronto. I mean, we think about, you know, our assessment of risk usually is biased based on what has happened in the recent past. And because everyone's made a lot of money off pre-con, they don't see it as risky. But these are the risks with pre-construction that if they go down, you know, you're in a bind. And, you know, $50,000, you know, I don't want to say it's not a lot of money, but it could be worse. People who bought low rise pre-construction homes, like a detached home for 200,000, you know, they're down probably 400,000 from what they paid it for, because low rise houses fell more, purchase
If
prices
they
higher.
paid 600,000, sorry.
Yeah.
If they
They
paid,
would be down, they would be down about 400 or 500,000. So if they bought for 2 million, it would maybe is worth 1.6 today, right? So they have to come up with an extra 400,000 in cash. I mean, who, you know, who has that just sitting around, right? And this is why when we hear about some of these distressed owners, you know, a while ago, like a year ago, people protesting, you know, this is what it is about. The value's gone down. They don't have the money and they can't close now. And they're just at risk of losing their deposits and potentially getting sued for even more than the deposits, right? So this is the risk with pre-construction properties.
and has this specifically become an issue because interest rates underwent this really historic hiking cycle?
Yeah.
So presumably, you know, that also slowed the market. A lot of buyers now are tapped out. The interest rates are too high for them to have the budgets they want. So, and we've seen a massive reduction in sales overall. So as you're caught in that downwind, these buyers are now at the end of the pre-con party, or at least this end of this particular pre-con party. And so they're getting caught. And that's one reason why prices could be going down. Is there also the risk, John, though? We hear some media stories about how when there was this pre-con frenzy, some people were encouraged to just buy this unit. All you need to do is put a deposit and of a certain percentage, and you can sell it on assignment before you ever have to qualify for a mortgage. So could pre-con buyers, especially in certain areas or certain buildings, be at risk towards that secondary activity? So let's maybe break down the question. One is this happening because of that slowdown of the market? Or is there this added risk where people might have really been speculating?
So both. So there is a big slowdown in the market. There's a couple of things going on. Pre-construction condos were generally priced 30 to 40+% more than existing condos, right? Which means even to break even, home prices need to increase, right? Over that horizon. So home prices did go up after 2019, but they've also dipped and have stalled, right? So some people may not have the appreciation that is needed to even break even, right? Because of high rates, because of the slowdown in the market. So that's one factor. But certainly the other is there was a big kind of push, especially back in 2019, like before COVID and leading up to COVID, this whole, you know, just buy a contract. And people were kind of like, there's tons of TikTok videos. I mean, people would share them on, I'm not on TikTok, but on, people would share the worst of them on Twitter. And you would see it. It's like agents. You don't need to worry about it. You just have to have a driver's license and put down the deposit. And in 1 or 2 years, just flip it. This is how I made money. It's like the easiest way to make tons of money. And a lot of people were doing this. And, you know, unfortunately, I mean, obviously that's pretty bad advice. I mean, it's not that simple, right? Like you can't obviously flip it if it's not worth more than what you paid for it. It assumes that there's a buyer for it, right? And tons of agents were talking like that, right? And listen, I think the challenge is people, you know, in this market, people believe what they want to believe, right? Like these agents were selling this story of easy money, right? Like I'm kind of old school. I don't know, like I'm like very old school where like when I hear stories of easy money, I'm like, I like to step back. I'm like, what are you talking about? This is a scam. There is no easy money. What do you talk? Like, it's just my mind's like complete opposite direction. Whereas most people are like, I can make 100 grand in like 12 months. How do I sign up? You know
You're
what I
looking
mean?
for the shady relative who's a prince
Yeah.
in Africa that's going to help you
But
out.
that is what people were selling. It's like, this is how I made money, you know. And listen, I don't like, maybe they made money that way. You know, I don't want to even say that all of these agents were lying completely. Like, maybe that they had a deal and they made 100 grand in 18 months. But so they're honest maybe about that. The lie is that it's that easy to make money, and anyone who buys pre-con can just make that much money in a short period of time. And
Yeah.
of course, does not talk about the risks, right? And the second you talk about risks, like, people are like, no, not interested. I like the agent who told me I'm going to make 150 grand in, 12 months, right? So, that's kind of the challenge with pre-con.
So yeah, this is the definition of speculation. When you are hoping that you buy a contract, hold it for a while, flip it, short, sell it before the property is even built for more than you bought it for. Um,
But
and
and to touch on that, and this is what people don't get, pre-con's like all speculation. Like, it's not really, people call it investing. You haven't bought anything. You're speculating on prices rising. That's the only reason you're buying pre-con, right? Otherwise, like, why would you pay 30 or 40% more for a pre-construction condo when you just get an existing unit, right? Because it's higher leverage, the deposit structure is better, and you're speculating that the price will go up, and you got to do nothing other than just put some deposit in the builder's trust account, right? It's speculation. Like, you're investing the second you own it and you rent it, fine. But the pre-construction process is largely a speculative bet, right? That prices will go higher. And if they don't, and that's the difference between investing. If I invest, doesn't matter to me if prices dip in five years from now, because I'm holding it, I still have it, right? I'm not buying just for the growth. But anyhow, side tangent.
yeah, so to finally put a summary, I guess, on this, we don't know why Gregor's neighbor
Mhm.
sold the assignment for so much less, presumably, than they bought it. We don't know if, for example, they were selling to a family member at a discount. Maybe they couldn't get a mortgage or
Mhm.
enough of a mortgage they needed to close, or maybe they never intended to in the first place.
Mhm.
So we don't know why that happens. That in turn puts pressure on Gregor being
Mhm.
able to close his unit.
Mhm.
And again, the same thing could happen, right? Somebody might have to now think
Absolutely.
about trying to unload their pre-con unit. So
Mhm.
it seems like a game of musical chairs, which is all fun until the music stops. And you're the
100%.
one, you're the people at the end of that,
Yeah.
the end of that run up. So it does lead to, I'm sure, a very stressful situation. And we're starting to see that
Yeah.
unfold. And is that Toronto area wide, John, that you're starting to see the assignment thing, or is that in certain areas, in certain outlying areas, are we seeing more of that?
No, I think it's like in a lot of, I mean, Southern Ontario where we work, I think it's quite common. I mean, a lot of people were buying pre-construction. It's not just Toronto, certainly the suburbs and even further out. Um, and the low rise is definitely in the suburbs, and they got hit the hardest because the construction cycle for houses is a lot shorter. So, anyone who bought in the peak, their house is ready this year, right? And prices are down from the peak. So they're definitely feeling it a lot more.
All right. So, Gregor, I'm not sure you heard exactly what you wanted to hear. There is some scope to push back. I'm going to take another swig of my coffee from my keep calm and carry on mug, and hopefully give you some courage that maybe going back to the appraiser and pushing back and asking to see more comparables or to consider more could be a recourse. But otherwise, John, it seems like it's stressful times.
It is, yeah, definitely.